sort of quick and not too terribly thought out video where I just talk about my opinions on the Winona skill tree and when I think about the whole ordeal, with probably a little bit of Wurt too, but we'll see how I feel about it, by the end of it. So I've been in the discussions on the forums and in the Clay Discord, on streams, talking about Winona and her skill tree, and I want to preface this by saying that, I don't think that Winona's skill tree is what she needed. Winona's skill tree currently is a large number of QOL changes to her structures, some number increases, a small amount of additional tools, and like 2 skills dedicated to her being more rounded out as a character. So here's the problem. This isn't what Winona needed. It feels like this update was approached from a point of making Winona stronger, which is fine when it comes to dedicating a couple of perks to it, but that's what a large portion of the skill tree is dedicated to, and it definitely isn't what she needed. So prior to the skill tree update, Winona was a character that was looked over by most of the community, aside from her most powerful tools, which, is really just the catapult. Catapults were usable by everyone, and because of that, what people would do is swap to Winona, put down the catapults, then swap off, which really made Winona stand out only as a swap character, if not outright just being the swap character. This kind of leads people to have a couple misconceptions when it comes to approaching Winona and how to fix the issue of her just being a tool, more than anything else, both of which I think are pretty flawed, with the first one being pretty prominent amongst people who think that the skill tree is good, that being that this technically makes Winona a stronger character, which isn't incorrect, because what she does is now just better. What she does is stronger, but it's kind of a misnomer in my opinion, because Winona as a character has always been pretty strong. Her strength was in her catapults, and how powerful they were as tools amongst the entire cast. So I don't think that approaching the skill tree from the perspective of, we need to buff the character, so let's make catapults better, is the correct approach, because that's not what was being complained about when it came to Winona. Nobody's ever really said that Winona or her catapults were weak. They really just say that Winona's got nothing going for her aside from her catapults, which I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the second idea seems to be the approach that a lot of people, specifically on the forums, have, of making Winona only able to operate her catapults, which I also think is a flawed perspective that especially doesn't fix underlying issues. So the biggest issue that Winona has had is that the character herself lacks any intrinsic perks and quirks that affect her playstyle in the same way that a character like Wigfrid or Wolfgang do. And I do choose these 2 examples very particularly, because whenever I bring up the flaws of Winona's skill tree, people always use these 2 as a sort of counterpoint, pointing to their skill trees and their similarities. Winona's skill tree is being compared to Wolfgang's skill tree and Wigfrid's, in that a large portion of their skill trees are focused on primarily increasing the numbers in some way. So, Wolfgang's got a damage increase, he's got an increased crit chance, he's got an increased movement speed for one of them, and he just has, like, an increase in planar damage, it just adds more numbers to him. Which, on the surface is a similar situation to another character like Wigfrid and Winona, in which Winona has increase in durability, she has an increase at the rate of which she gains inspiration, and even an increase in the rate at which she tames Beefalo. Like, they all have things like that. Winona's skill tree primarily focuses on the efficiency of her generators, the power, the strength of her catapults, giving them more range and more damage, and one of them is even just increasing the area of the spotlight. And the primary difference between Winona and Wigfrid and Wolfgang are that Wigfrid and Wolfgang were already unique standouts in regards to their skill set prior to just the skill tree. So Wolfgang was always the heavy hitter, he always had that appeal going for him, and he had a bunch of perks to supplement that playstyle whenever you would play Wolfgang. The same thing can kind of be said for Wigfrid, in which she has her own set of skills, she has her own set of perks and quirks that make her stand out amongst the cast whenever you're playing as her. Winona is very much not that case, as all that she really had is speed crafting when she's above a certain hunger threshold, and being able to dodge Charlie at night. That was basically it. That is the only thing you have going for you if you choose to play Winona for a prolonged period of time. Which is, by the way, the primary reason why the number increasing approach does not work for Winona. You know, that isn't to say that the number increases are bad, which is what I think people are getting caught on whenever I say that the skill tree is bad. You know, I can't really say that this doesn't make the character stronger, and that, you know, number increases are still pretty strong. But it's just not what she needed. It's not what she needed to stand out amongst the cast. It's not what she needed to overall become a more interesting character. And it's not what she needed in order for more people to pick her up and enjoy playing her. You know, as far as the making it so that only Winona can do it, that also doesn't fix the issue. You're still playing as a character who doesn't really have a lot of perks intrinsic to her, but now you're the only one who could use these catapults. You know, you have to understand that catapults are a part of the playstyle, but you're not going to have catapults on you at every single step of the journey. So really what Winona needs is perks that she can latch onto and that carry her throughout the entirety of the game, not just in situations where you would want to use catapult. Because, you know, these are all things that Wigfrid, Wolfgang, you know, all these characters already have, the ones that really stand out on their own. So, you know, that being said, what does Winona need in order to remedy, you know, making her less of a swap character? You know, we've already established that the lazier approach of fixing the swap character is to just make the tools not work with other characters, which, you know, I think is bad. And it's really telling for me as somebody who's played Winona for a lot of long period of time, who has and hasn't also played Winona, based on the arguments they present when it comes to saying catapults should be Winona specific. Because one of the biggest issues with catapults is their cost. You know, I've talked about it before in one of my videos, but the TLDR is that arguing with why you should be able to dip into the rock supply at any team, only so that you benefit from it is in the most selfish way possible, is incredibly difficult. Because nobody's going to want to help you get rocks. Nobody's going to want to assist you in setting up your catapults if it means that you're the only one that benefits from it, and the only benefit that your team could get from it is if you're there in the moment with them. You know, it just sets up for an incredibly unfun circumstance where you're gonna have to weigh the cost and the benefit of setting up these catapults, and whether or not it's worth it if you're gonna be able to stick around with the team, or, you know, maybe you get busy, maybe something happens in the background and you're not there, but they really need these catapults to operate. And the fact that you're not there, it just makes it feel bad for you and your team because you're not there to support them. Catapults being the way that they are kind of remedies that and gives you sort of a presence in the team even if you're not there, which is something that is super good and that I really appreciate in the character. But, you know, I digress. So, you know, I don't think the number approach works. I don't think making it Winona specific works. So, you know, what else is there? What approach could play possibly take in order to make the skill tree even better? And there are a couple of perks that I have neglected to mention because I've been putting them off. And they're part of her skill tree that do an amazing job at fleshing out the character even more. And, you know, that is the bottom and the top shelf. So Winona's skill tree is divided into shelves, and the first row does wonders for a character in a lot of ways. You know, these perks are things that help Winona in a QOL sort of way, a quality of life sort of way, and are easy to get early on. You know, she has the ability to move her structures, she has the ability to put them on snooze mode, she has the ability to buff spotlights, which, you know, let's be real, should have been buffed a long time ago. And she also just has the ability to, like, make things recharge in that area a little bit faster, which all of which is pretty good, but they do have one issue that unites all of them. They aren't base kit. You know, in the beta preview that Clay did, part of what they talked about was that some of these perks were going to be base kit, being able to pack up and move her structure, the structures going into the snooze mode. All of these were said with the implication that they were going to be base kit quality of life features for Winona, which would have done so much to differentiate the character from anybody else. This, however, turns out to not be the case, which is a huge shame because of how much it would have helped the character stand on her own 2 feet. Just being able to interact with her structures in a unique and helpful way that no other character could do would have gone a long way. So what I'm saying is, please just make these base kit. There is no reason these things should not already be base kit. So, you know, that's one thing that would have helped the character stand out a little bit more. Next up, however, is the top shelf, which has some of my favorite skill trees in this video. You know, shout out to Mither, by the way. He compiled a list of all the stuff that the Shadow Seeker's skill tree points does for Winona. But basically, it all revolves around these rose-colored glasses that you can scan certain items in order to have different unique interactions with. The primary one is being able to scan, you know, in quotes, a flower, which, you know, gives you a new item, and that item, if you die with it, lets you respawn either at the nearest floored postern or at the nearest nightlight, both of which are incredibly useful since they're basically just second chance watches with a dedicated area in which you spawn. Next up, she also has immunity to darkness, which is just always active, though this doesn't mean that you don't lose sanity, since you still lose that while you're in complete darkness. Following that is walking over small patches of ocean using the flower, which just lets you make like a little flower bridge. And lastly is the wormhole shuffling ability, which basically just lets you use one wormhole to teleport to any other one on the map, which is really good. You know, this is an incredible feature for the character to have, and it's easily my favorite perks of her that were introduced in this skill tree. And it feels like a missed opportunity that this isn't what the focus of her skill tree was. You know, she also does have the Wagstaff side, which offers the Telebrella and Telepad, but that simply isn't enough. You know, but I firmly believe that this approach could have been enough. The approach that I would much rather have had is if the skill tree was divided into 3 sections, with one going down the middle. You know, the middle one could just be the perks that Clay's given Winona in this skill tree, you know, whether that be increase in fire rate, increase in range, increase in generator efficiency, things like that. Maybe the bottom shelf could just be implemented base kit, please. You know, I don't think that these should be requiring skill points to invest in. I think they should just be intrinsic to the character, but, you know, I already talked about that. But the other 2 sides of the skill tree could just be focusing on her allegiance to Charlie and to Wagstaff. You know, one side would be the Charlie side, which just gives you all the perks pertaining to the rose-colored glasses that are present in the top shelf, and expanded on them even further. Whether it be, you know, giving additional uses to the flowers, like whether it be dispelling shadow creatures for a temporary amount of time, being able to infuse tools with a, you know, a sort of shadow type of element, and then, you know, that can make it so that you do actions more efficiently, whether that be faster or you just take less like hits in order to do them. But as a result, it would function similarly to a dark sword, in which while you have it equipped, you're just losing sanity. And the other side could have just been the Wagstaff side, in which it expands on things like the Wobot, giving it maybe more functions, basically. Maybe being able to expand on the remote, which, you know, I'll say it currently sucks. Making it like a walking cane alternative, like I mentioned in the preview beta video. And just overall expanding on different structures and different items that Wagstaff might be able to give you. Like, my personal favorite has always been giving sprinklers to Winona. You know, that would have been cool. Giving like a handheld thumper, which functions as a weapon and as a tool, letting you deal damage with an AoE, but that AoE also like destroys structures, or, you know, destroys trees or breaks rocks, things like that. Conceptually, I think that dividing the skills between Charlie and Wagstaff with the neutral Winona buffs route would have been amazing for the character, and would have made her stand out amongst the cast as not just the catapult character, but would have given her those things that other characters had. You know, that being the reason to continue playing the character well after you set up catapults. The fact that Clay took this approach where they decided to focus on number buffs ultimately is just very disappointing. And it sucks because they've shown that they could have done better. It feels like if Clay focused on the last shelf and not just focused on giving Winona number buffs, then this skill tree could have been so much more for the character. But it feels like it's so late in development that unless they pushed back the release date of the skill tree and remade it, then it never will be. And that is so disappointing. You know, the TLDR of it, I guess, is that they gave Winona the Wolfgang and Wigford approach when she herself is not a uniquely interesting enough character to where she would be able to support that kind of change. You know, what they should have done was they should have taken a Willow approach where they expand on her themes in new and incredibly unique ways in order to make her feel like more of a standout character. And that's really all I have to say about the Winona skill tree. I just think it's very disappointing. But, you know, onto the Wurt side of the skill tree, which I have nothing but good things to say about it. The Wurt skill tree is incredibly strong. You know, it doubles down on some of her most important aspects, those being primarily the merms, by giving them buffs in unique and interesting ways. You know, I really personally appreciate the merm-oriented approach. That isn't the only thing that Wurt has with her. You know, she has the amphibian skill tree, which basically functions as a way to give added utility to her being wet. You know, whether that be the first couple of perks being a sanity increase, the middle perk being the ability to just basically ignore wetness in regards to your temperature. And with the final two being a health regen while you're wet, and being able to use wetness as health. All of these are pretty unique to the character and really interesting, and really make her feel like more of a merm. So I think, at the very least, this approach is interesting. Going back to the merm buffs, all of these kind of do revolve around Merm King to some degree, with you being able to give Merm King certain items in order to buff merms, as well as being able to make structures that give merms certain tools. One of them being a way to give merms armor, so that, you know, they're just more tanky. Being able to give them tools in order to increase their utilities, so that being chopping down trees, and now digging up stumps. And all of these items are incredibly cheap, so it's really good for Wurt to have, just to be able to supply her merms with even more benefits. There's also the mosquito line of skill trees, which I covered in the previous video where I, you know, go over the Clay stream where they preview the beta. And it doesn't seem terrible, but it just kind of seems like, you know, it doesn't stand out as much as the other skill tree points in this line. Then she's also able to, like, you know, increase the health, or I guess the hunger of Merm King, and, you know, makes him digest things lower, you know? It's just hunger buffs, right? Two of them are kind of like outliers in regards to this whole line, which one of them just gives the merms a bunnymen type effect, where whenever they're injured enough, they'll back up and then regain that health, and then won't fight until they cross that health threshold. The next one is kind of interesting in its own way, where with it, other players nearby can get the swamp speed boost, which isn't terrible given her affinity perks, which I'll delve into in a second, but it feels pretty niche, and it doesn't feel like you're going to dedicate a skill tree point to it, but, you know, that does depend on whether or not you like the affinity perks or not. Both of which apply their own unique buffs to merms, with the lunar mutated merm being able to infuse your merms with, you know, lunar planar damage, and with the other one being, you know, the same thing but with shadows. The final stage of both of these perks, however, do give you the option to make a staff, which lets you put down a temporary merm arena, which is just like a big patch of swamp turf, which gives you, and I guess your friends and merms, movement speed buff. And, you know, it's neat. You know, I think Wurt's skill tree is pretty good. A lot of these are just number buffs, but for Wurt, I think it's fine because she's a unique enough character to where she can support these, and her own base kit skills supplement this pretty well. So it really feels like it's a well-rounded way to approach buffing this character. But You know, that's all I really have to say about this update. I'm just kind of disappointed by half of the skill trees in it. Hopefully this helps kind of understand what I thought of it, where I'm coming from. That's all I really wanted to talk about. Hopefully Play pushes back this update and, you know, maybe changes their approach to Winona, but I just don't think it's gonna happen. Yeah.